right, so just continue with control structures. And again, our focus for this video is going to be selection control, continuing on the previous one. Just to recap, a selection control allows you to selectively decide which part of your code is going to be executed. We practice with some simple if statements. So you have your if, you have your condition, and then you have some statements in it. You can have an else or not have an else, and depending on that, it's going to basically decide what to execute or not to execute. So you go through something or skip some part of your code. Last time in the previous video, I talked about there are also ways to have more than two options. And you can do that using multi-way selections. So there are two different ways that we can do it. You can use elif to create more options for yourself, or we can have nested if-else statement. You can go from one to the other. You can combine the two if you want to. But I highly recommend to stick with one, get comfortable with it, try to switch it to the other one, and go back and forth between the two. But if you can, do not combine the two. It becomes confusing if you have elif and then you have nesting. Unless you feel very comfortable, you know exactly what you're doing. Try to stick with one or the other, but practice for sure going from one to the other and back and forth to be able to kind of understand both the structures and be able to write them as you see fit. But both are equally fine, both are equally correct. One, in my opinion, looks simpler than the other, and especially if you have not too many options, you can nested if-else might be fine. But if you have too many statements, too many paths that you want to have, nested might become kind of confusing and hard to keep track of what is there and what you need to have next and so on and so forth. We are going to see an example of that in a second. Okay, so let's say if you have a letter grade and you want to see, so you have like a grade and you want to see what letter grade you're getting, right? So let's say the grade is 85 and you want to see if it's A, B, C, D, or F, for instance. So that's a great example of having conditionals. So the grade is 85 and we have like a very clear set of conditions here. If this grade is greater than 90, greater or equal to 90, depending on what type of a scale you're using, the letter grade is going to be A. If it's between 80 and 90, it's going to be B. If between 70 and 80 is going to be C, and so on and so forth. So we're going to set that up. And just remember, with any problem that you're given, if you're just reviewing that in your head and you're using this keyword if in it or whether, that means you need a selection, right? If the grade is greater than 90, I get an A. So that is the if. That is a keyword you're looking for to decide if you need to use a selection control. So we have that grade and we want to set that up. Okay, so I'm going to take this out completely and I'm going to replace this and change it to the grade. Enter the grade. And then we are going to get that information, convert it to a numeric value, and then we are going to set our conditions. Whenever I'm creating conditions that have multiple paths or multiple options, more than one or two, I'm going to check every single one as I go before adding to it. So I'm going to write the first if, check it. If it's fine, I'm going to add the next one. I'm going to check the next one. If it's fine, I'm going to add the next one, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to have a formula for myself. So I'm going to start with letter grade A and just make my way down. You can start from fail and make your way up. It's up to you. It's totally up to you. You can go any other order that you want as long as you put the conditions in a correct way and kind of cover everything that you have. Okay, so let's just start with A. So I'm going to start with my condition. If this grade that I have is greater or equal to 90, colon, that is the end of my header, then you see I have the indentation automatically. If you don't, if your ID does not provide that automatically, you can tab. You can just say tab or put the spaces. Doesn't matter. You just need the indentation. And it doesn't necessarily need to be 4 spaces. It could be anything. You can have 2 tabs if you want to. It's up to you. It's your choice. By default, it puts 4 spaces or a tab for you, but you can change that if you want to. To keep it consistent, I go with the default spacing for indentation and just keep it that way. So if grade is greater or equal to 90, I'm going to print A. So I have that. So I'm going to test this part. I'm going to just see, make sure everything is good. Because for instance, like we checked this part in a previous example. Let's say I don't have that int in there. If I run this one and it gets an input from me, let's say 85, it's going to give me an error message. So since I tested that part, I can go and say, okay, I have like 4 lines of code in there. It's much easier to troubleshoot it if it's a smaller part, a smaller script, they can go and fix it. So I see the error happening here. I read the error message. There's a problem with the type of the variables that I have. One is a string, one is an integer, and it cannot compare those two. I'm 100% sure 90 is an integer value. So that leaves grade a string type. So I go back, then I created this grade. I created it in line 11. In line 11, I have input. I know input gives me a string type. So now I know the problem. So I know it is a string and convert that to a numeric value. So now if I run it, I should not get that problem. I'm going to put 95 and here I get A. I'm going to run it one more time and I'm going to put 85. So I should not get anything because 85 is not greater or equal to 90. So I'm not getting anything. If I run it again and I put the border value, which is 90, I should get A, right? So I tested a value that is greater than 90, a value that is 90, a value that is smaller than 90, and it worked exactly the way I want it, right? So now it's time to add more stuff to it. So I'm going to go with the F, and I'm going to add that to my else. So I'm going to have A and F for this point, or F, A, and anything else. So I'm going to just for now say this is, you either get a grade that is greater or equal to 90, which is A, or anything else is an F, right? So let's try this one. So if I put 90 is an A. If I put anything else, let's say 85 or any other number that is less than 90, you're going to get an F, okay? So that is the main kind of selection control, the simplest one that we could have. So you have only 2 options that you can pick from, either this one or this one. Now we are going to use elif to add more options to our conditionals. And I'm going to start with the elif, and then we get to nested after that. Okay, so I have my if, which is the first one. So the first one is always an if. If you want to have an else, else is going to be always the last one in your block. And then between if and else, you can have elifs, right? You can have as many elifs as you want. With elifs, which is a combination of the else for that if, you need to have a condition. The only one that doesn't need to have a condition is your else. Anything else that has the keyword if in it must have a condition. So we have if, the first one, greater equal to 90. The next one, we want to look to see if a grade is between 80 and 90. So I'm going to have this grade is greater or equal to 80 and if grade is less than 90. We want to check both sides to see if it's greater than 80 and also less than 90. If that's the case, I want to say print B. So that is letter grade B. And I'm going to test this one before I move forward. So let's test this one. It still should work for 90, 95, any other number equal or greater than 90. Next, I'm going to test it with numbers from 80 to 90. So it works. I'm going to do some more tests here. So I'm going to test 80 as well. So I'm still getting B. If I do 89, I should still get B, so all good. And if I put anything that is less than 80, I should get an F. Okay, cool. So now you feel confident, you can add more stuff to it. To make it faster, I'm going to just copy and paste and just change my value. So 70, this should be 80, and then the letter grade is going to be C. And then next one, we are going to cover D. So this is 60, and this is going to be 70, and this one is going to be our D. And then anything less than 60 is going to be an F. So now you go ahead and test the entire thing. So if I put 55, shouldn't be an F. If I put 62, for instance, this is a D. You can check all of the border ones. If I put 70, it should give us a C, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it works perfect. Okay, it works really good. Everything, like, it gives us the letter grade, the correct one. We tested that. I can test some more with your code. And now I have a question for you. So take a look at this code and see if you can make it more efficient, right? Right now I have some stuff here that are not necessary, right? So think about it, pause the video for a couple of minutes, think about it, and see if you can change it in a way that make it more efficient, but give you the exact same output, right? So pause the video, and then when you're ready, you can unpause and watch the rest of it. So the solution for that, look at this first if statement that we have. So if grade is greater or equal to 90, print A. So if your grade is 90 or greater, is it possible that you pass that condition? No, there is no possibility. If its grade is 90 or greater, that's it. You're going to print A. You're done with that. So there's no point for you to check to see if grade is less than 90, because it is. If it wasn't, you never got to this condition. So having this part is completely unnecessary. If you're checking to see if the grade is greater or equal to 80, if it is, you print B, all right? That means it is, you already check it is less than 90 if you get to this point. And if it's greater than 80, that means it is between 80 and 90. You print B. So when you get to this condition, if you pass this condition, that means your grade must be less than 80. There's no possibility if it's greater than 80 and you already haven't printed A or B. All right, you never get here. So if you get to this condition, that means grade must be less than 80. So this condition is not necessary. You don't need to have that. And same thing here. If you get to this condition, that means grade must be less than 70. So you don't have to have that condition there. And if you run it, it should work exactly the same. Exactly the same output is going to give you the exact same output. And you can test it more, but I assure you it's going to work fine. I hope that makes sense. The order of the statements that you put inside your if-else block is very important. And sometimes, in this case, we didn't have to put the second, so you don't have to check both borders because you already checked one in the previous conditions that you had. And there are some cases, depending on how you order them, you must have both, or you can omit one, depending again on how you put them there. So practice with that, see if you can set that up yourself again. But I'm going to talk about how we can set up nested if-else statement. So I'm going to comment this part for now, and I'm going to just get this part of it actually, and continuing with that. So, all right, so and this part. So we are going to start all over again from the basic ones that we had. All right, so we had this if and else, all right? So if grade is greater or equal to 90, print A, else print F. So with multiple selection, another thing that we can do is we can nest another if-else inside either your if part or else part. I'm going to go with my else part, so I'm going to just copy this one, or you can just type it. So I'm going to say, okay, I have this another if else inside this. If grade is greater or equal to 80, you see the condition is same condition as I have for like when we use elif. So print b, and then we are going to have an else, all right? And now else, we are going to have this. You can check this one. Right now, we only have it for A and B. And so if its grade is greater or equal to 90, you print A. Else, you go here. You have another if else, and you see indentations. This entire block is part of your else. That means you need to have indentations for your if and else. That means like this is kind of the line that you have for it. And each if and else inside it have its own indentations, right? That is why we are calling it nesting. You're nesting one inside the other one. So you have to follow rules for each one of them. So we have one for A, one for B, and then here we get to another else. So I'm going to say if now grade is greater or equal to 70, then print C, and then we are going to have an else for this one, and the else is going to be an F. Now we have three covered, A, B, and C. Now we are going to cover our D. So if grade is greater or equal to 60, print D. And then for our else, we are going to print F, okay? So look at this structure here. We are nesting one inside the other. So we have this if and else, and then the else has another if else, and then this else has another if else. This else has another if else, right? So it's just basically nesting one under the other one. When you use nesting, you just need to be very careful with the indentations. Don't mess that up because like if, for instance, if you go this way, it's not going to work. If you run it, it's not going to go through. It's going to give you an error message. Or if you mess up the indentation for two of these, like I have this if, and I have an extra space here. They're not lined up perfectly. It's not going to go through. It's going to complain right there and say, there's something wrong with the indentation here. You need to fix that first to be able to proceed. So just make sure they all line up perfectly. All of the blocks are part of one thing, one control structure for you. And then it's going to give you the exact same output as the previous one. So if I have 85, it's going to give you B, and you can test it with different values. 50 is going to give you an F. So it's going to go through again, very similar to the previous one, do the comparison, and then as soon as it hits a correct condition, it's going to skip the rest of it. So is 85 greater than 90? No, it is not. Skips the statement, jumps into the else. And then is 85 greater than 80? Yes, it is. So you print B and you skip the rest of them. You're not even checking the conditions, nothing. You just ignore, move on. Okay? Hope that makes sense. So just practice with the two. And I'm going to quickly show you how to go from one to the other. So let me comment this part for a second. And I'm going to start here. Okay, so let's say you have a block that uses elif and you want to go from elif to nesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this one to an else and then say enter if this is the new condition. Make sure you fix the indentation and then you go to the else part of it. Or actually, let's just make sure we do always, whenever you create a new if, you always do the tab. So now I have this else, if goes down, and then select everything else, tab. And then here you have else, colon, enter, select everything else, tab. And then that is going from one to the other, right? So I went from elif to nested if else, all right? So that is one. I'm going to go back to how it was, or actually let's keep it. Just do it. So again, create, select the rest, tab, select the rest, tab, right? And now let's go from this one to Elif. So uncomment. So for this one, I'm going to select this one, delete. So you have the condition. And I'm going to select everything that we have. And I'm going to go to format and use this control bracket one. So it brings everything back one. I'm going to select, delete. So I'm going to keep the EL and I'm going to go all the way to this if and delete. So now I have my condition, select everything and go back one tab and then delete and then select everything else, go back one, and then that's it. That is what you wanted to do. So going from one to the other. Just a quick recap. When you have multiple selection, you can either use elif statements to create multiple paths for yourself, or you can use nested if else. Both are equally correct. Some people prefer one over the other one. It is your choice, okay? See which one you feel more comfortable and practice with that, but know both of them, because if you're looking at someone else's code, you're working for a company, someone else giving you a code, you need to know exactly what they have done. Maybe they feel comfortable with something that you are not comfortable with. So understand both, but you can always have your way of writing a selection control or multi-way selection control.